Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, the top 10 instances of election interference by America. The current investigations into the Russian meddling into US elections could potentially be one of the biggest scandals in American history, with the intelligence community in agreement as to Russia's role in undermining the elections by producing fake news, attempting to hack election systems, as well as its theft and proliferation of DNC emails. It's hard not to conclude that Russia's meddling was an overwhelming success. Many American citizens have expressed outrage over the breach of their hallowed institutions, with some even calling it an act of war. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has been declared by intelligence analysts as the architect of the cyber warfare campaign. Putin, an authoritarian leader who has been decried by human rights activists, has not yet been repudiated by Donald Trump. After being told that Putin was a killer by an interviewer, Trump responded by saying, "There's a lot of killers. Do you think our country is so innocent?" Well, that got us here at this channel thinking, is Trump right? Is America not so innocent? Well, it turns out he is, and he isn't. Here are 10 elections that America interfered with. Number 10. Argentina used interventions as a rallying cry. In 1946, the United States published a 130-page document with the hope of swinging the election in Argentina in favor of the more conservative candidate. Called the Blue Book, the document claimed that Juan Perón, running on the Labour Party ticket, had Nazi sympathies and a secret plan to install the Fourth Reich in Argentina. The Blue Book threatened to derail the former Labour secretary's campaign. Perón had worked to increase the wages of workers in Argentina, which threatened American business interests. Instead of running from the allegations, Perón confronted them head-on, creating a blue and white book representing Argentina's colors. The book and the election became a referendum on Yankee imperialism and intervention, which led to a decisive victory over the American-backed candidate. Number 9. Italy would not have a left-wing government for decades. With the Cold War in full swing, elections were not viewed as simply the choices of citizens for leaders, but the choice of capitalism or communism. After the coup in Czechoslovakia, the United States became fearful of the spread of Soviet influence. That led to a concerted effort not to allow the communists to win the Italian elections of 1948. Declassified reports show that the CIA gave more than $1 million to the Christian Democrats and their candidate Alcide Gasperi, and also published forged letters that were aimed at discrediting the socialist and communist candidates. In an interview with the New York Times, former CIA operative F. Mark Wyatt discussed U.S. interference, saying, "We had bags of money that we delivered to selected politicians to defray their political expenses, their campaign expenses, for posters, for pamphlets. The CIA used the media expertly to alter opinion by authoring millions of letters, purchasing radio broadcast time, and even having books published that warned of the consequences of a communist victory. The result was an overwhelming victory for the US-backed candidate." Number 8. Japan's case of election meddling foreshadowed the Iran-Contra affair. US interference in the Japanese electoral process will remind many readers of the Iran-Contra scandal that threatened the Reagan administration. Hoping to protect business interests and ward off the spread of communism, the United States played a significant role in Japanese elections. In order to covertly assist Japanese officials, the CIA smuggled 3 million tons of tungsten, a valuable metal, from Japanese military installations into the United States and then sold it at a profit to the Pentagon. Using these profits, they funneled cash to Japanese candidates and politicians that supported US interests. Retired officials admit as much, stating that the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan was given millions of dollars during the 1950s and 1960s. The result of United States aid was a nearly 38-year-long run of one-party dominance. That run ended in 1993 when the party lost control as a result of complaints of corruption. Some US officials have regret for the CIA's actions during this project, saying, "That is the heart of darkness, and I'm not comfortable talking about it because it worked." But it wouldn't be the worst of the agency's meddling in this period. Number 7. Philippines elections show that they aren't that expensive to buy. One of the most outlandish cases on our list begins with notorious CIA director Alan Dulles offering an agent $5 million to swing the 1953 election in the Philippines. The agent didn't need the $5 million, later bragging that it only cost him $1 million to elect Ramon Magsaysay. Lansdale later admitted that the funds were raised from American companies which did business on the island. The money spent to elect Magsaysay was used to boost his image in the public's eye while denigrating his opponent. Additionally, the other candidate, President Elpidio Quirino was also victimized by the CIA as he was drugged before a big speech, making him incoherent. Despite the CIA's election meddling, it was unclear whether Magsaysay was going to win. It was reported at the time that American warships were standing by if the results did not go as planned. Magsaysay won the election with 2/3 of the vote, and he'd continue to garner support of the CIA while in office. Number 6. Vietnam's devastating war began with election interference. One of the most harmful cases of election meddling for American citizens was the 1955 South Vietnamese election. The Pentagon Papers would later reveal that South Vietnam was the intervention of the United States. Nevertheless, the 1955 referendum on who to lead South Vietnam opened the door for continued US involvement in the region. And we all know that that went really well. The election pitted Emperor Bao Dai and Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem against one another. Diem was a Catholic in a land of Buddhists, and yet he won the elections with 98% of the 600,000 votes cast. There were only 400,000 registered voters at the time, but the CIA rigged elections saw Diem depose Emperor Dai and then go on to win re-election until he was eventually deposed by an American-backed coup in 1963. His death would only further entangle the US in the region, where fighting continued for more than a decade. Number 5. Guatemala was fearful of American military might. One of the most prominent cases of US corporate interests going toe-to-toe with a sovereign nation is the fall of the Jacobo Arbenz Guzman-led government of Guatemala. Elected in 1950, Arbenz won with more than 50% of the vote and vowed to enact the land reforms that he had promised in his campaign. Guatemala, like many other countries in Latin America, had a massive divide between their rich and their poor, with 2% of the population owning more than 70% of the nation's land, some of which was owned by foreign corporations, most notably American-owned United Fruit. As Arbenz expropriated land from United Fruit, while also receiving weapons from the Eastern Bloc, the CIA decided to act, engaging in a psychological campaign to sow unrest into the Arbenz government. Propaganda leaflets were distributed, radio broadcasts declared that an invasion was coming, and US planes went on bombing raids, scaring the Guatemalan civilians. Arbenz became so frightened of an invasion that he effectively resigned, and a US-backed military junta took power. Number 4. Laos would not be bought, but paid dearly for it. As the Vietnam War expanded, Laos was made a victim of election meddling. In 1958, the US hoped to use a rural aid program to convince voters to elect anti-communists in the upcoming elections. Tons of food, medicine, and equipment was airdropped in order to sway the people in Laos. However, the Lao communists used the aid as proof of foreign intervention and went on to win a resounding victory. That did not stop US intervention, though, as for the next decade, CIA officers would train and arm the Hmong ethnic minority, as well as carry out a bombing campaign that would result in the death of a tenth of the nation's population. Number 3. The Dominican Republic was ruled for 28 years by a single man. As our list progresses, the cases get worse and worse. This continues with America's meddling into the Dominican Republic's affairs. After a strong anti-communist general was assassinated, a reformist leader, Juan Bosch, took power. He was immediately opposed, though, by the military. The military eventually overthrew Bosch, but civilians began attacking the military government, calling for his return to power. Fearing another Cuba in the region, Lyndon Johnson went so far as to send 22,000 troops to support the military government and help bring about a peaceful transition of power. Elections were to be held, and the US-backed candidate Joaquim Balaguer won and would rule non-consecutively for nearly 28 years. His rule saw hundreds of politicians become millionaires and thousands of political opponents murdered. Number 2. Congo never had a chance to succeed. One of the most tragic cases of interference in this video is the case of the Congo. The actions of US and Belgium officials not only corrupted a legitimate democratic nation, but may have led to the years of instability and violence after. Arguably the most charismatic figure to rise out of post-colonial Africa was Patrice Lumumba, leader of the Mouvement National Congolais. Lumumba was imprisoned for his activities by the Belgians, but was still able to garner enough support while behind bars. On Congo's Day of Independence, Lumumba gave a stirring speech about the price of independence, saying, "No Congolese will ever forget that independence was won in struggle, a persevering and inspired struggle carried on from day to day, a struggle in which we were undaunted by privation or suffering, and stinted neither strength nor blood. For it was a noble and just struggle, and indispensable to put an end to the humiliating slavery which was imposed upon us by force." He said this flanked by Belgian officials who would not soon forget his words. Soon after forming a government, the Congolese leader was faced with mutinies within his own military. Provinces of the large Congolese state, angered after years of oppression, attacked Belgian citizens. The attacks prompted Belgium, with the help of the US, to intervene and take over the mineral-rich province of Katanga. Lumumba was dismissed from his position as prime minister and was eventually captured and executed. The possibility of a unified Congolese nation. It was over. Number 1. Chile is one of the biggest victims of election interference. The cases of intervention and interference on our list only grow tragic as we go forward. Chile absolutely takes the cake in this regard. Like Lumumba, Salvador Allende was an immensely charismatic leader who was also a socialist. In the 1964 election, the US spent $2.3 million funding Allende's opponent, which led to his defeat. In the next election, the CIA was not so lucky, as Allende won a narrow victory. Allende believed in the nationalization of industries, which frightened US businesses. As president, Allende had a substantial impact on improving the lives of working people, and wages increased as he raised the minimum wage and increased government expenditure. He also worked to fight illiteracy, embarking on a campaign that would send teachers to the impoverished regions around the country. Allende's bold program scared many leaders in Washington, and in 1973, just 3 years after becoming president, Allende was ousted from power. With the CIA-funded military surrounding the presidential palace, Allende killed himself, though some historians debate this. Allende's death led to the reign of Augusto Pinochet, one of the most brutal regimes on record. The regime carried out the killing of more than 3,000 people and led to the exile of more than 20,000 Chileans. Pinochet was in power for more than 15 years. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and do not forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, a couple of videos from the archive, and as always, thank you for watching.